Yay, we're recording.
Hey.
Okay. Hello there. Hi, everybody, and welcome to part 2 of the Superheroes quiz as part of the series of webinars that Superheroes are running. Superheroes is a not-for-profit organisation and who are running a series of webinars and sort of fun quizzes and facts sessions for people to learn more about different situations, and it's the support of lone parent sessions because we appreciate what everybody's going through at this tricky time of C19. So welcome tonight. You've got myself, Katrina, and you've also got Ian with me, who is also another of the NLP for Kids practitioners. I'll tell you a bit about myself first. So I'm Katrina. I've been part of the Superheroes for a few years now and NLP for Kids, and I have my own School of Thought coaching business. I work with young people, families and with schools when we're allowed in, of course, and I work with them in emotional and mental well-being. I've worked with NLP for Kids for several years now and really enjoy being part of that wider team and working with everybody, and it's been great to come to you and join with you as part of these webinars. We're running the quiz tonight. I know there was the autism quiz that we had the other week with Gemma, and we've got a few other quizzes coming up as well, so she'll tell a bit more about them later on. But I'll pass you over to Ian, and Ian can introduce himself.
Hi, yes, I'm Ian Davis. I'm based in Aylesbury, for those of you who are based elsewhere in the country. So I have my own business, Aylesbury Therapy for Kids, which is a franchise of NLP for Kids. I work like Katrina does in schools, so I still work in Reading online, which is interesting. I do some work in a school in Milton Keynes, and then the rest of my work is taken up with one-to-ones with children on Zoom or Teams or whatever version of those that they're using or whatever. So life is very full, very good, very interesting and very satisfying. I've been with NLP for Kids for something over 4 years now. And yeah, it's great, thoroughly enjoyable. Yeah, if NLP is something that's of interest to you, then yeah, you could do worse than get involved with a company like NLP for Kids. They do a very, very good job. So yeah, back to you, Katrina.
Brilliant. So that's a little bit about Ian and I. So we're here to entertain you tonight on the world of ADHD. Now, I have to say, obviously, that's not a specialism that we have, same as the autism the other night, but it's obviously things that we come across in the work that we do with the young people. So it's been a really amazing learning curve for me, finding out some more information about what we can share with you tonight. So it's a quiz in a sense, but what we're doing is we thought we would share it more as a fact-finding mission between Ian and myself. And we'll go through and we'll just give you some information on some common myths and facts around ADHD. But please join when you join us, contribute. We'd love to interact with you. If you've got any questions or anything you want to answer, then please make a comment. That would be absolutely fantastic. So just to begin with, as I say, we'll just formulate some facts and common myths and facts about ADHD. So the first one I've got that I suppose comes up quite often, and then people say, is ADHD real? Is it real? Well, I suppose in that sense it is, because ADHD is a biological condition. It is one of the most common conditions in childhood, and it can impact on focus, organisation and self-control. So it is one of the biggest things that we come across in childhood, and it is, yes, it's definitely real, and it is a biological condition. So
yeah, totally go with that. Very much when you are talking to a child with ADHD, you kind of know they have ADHD. They don't need to tell you, you know. It could be that they're fidgeting, they can't concentrate, they can't focus, they go off on a tangent and you think, oh, where's that going? Yeah, you kind of know.
You kind of know there's certain characteristics that you become aware of in a young person with ADHD. But hopefully for people who are maybe not aware of that, or they're trying to get their head around and understand what ADHD is, this fact-finding mission that Ian and I have been on for you will help you to understand this a little bit better as well as we go through. Another kind of common myth you find, or questions you can hear about, because obviously we work a lot with young people, but some of the time that we do the work that we do can work with adults, especially when we're working with wider families and parents. So another sort of common question is does it only affect children? Well, actually, no, it doesn't just affect children. Millions of young people and adults have ADHD. And most kids, you know, another thing can be, can you outgrow ADHD? Well, most kids don't totally outgrow ADHD, although some symptoms can sort of lessen or disappear as they get older. And symptoms can also change as kids get older and learn ways to manage them. So as we introduce sort of coping mechanisms and strategies that they can use to help deal with some of the other symptoms that come up, which can be associated with it, is anxiety and different areas, then you know, they learn to manage them. So then some of those sort of troublesome areas that they had before tend to lessen because they know how to deal with them. They have the coping mechanisms. But that's not the same as outgrowing them. Most people with ADHD will continue to have symptoms into adulthood. And it's actually common for ADHD not to be diagnosed until after high school. And I think there's a common misconception there that it's picked up more when children are younger, but a lot of the times it isn't until they're at high school. And that's really true for kids who did well in school and who don't come across as having that hyperactive side that is pretty common and aware of in ADHD. And they often learn ways to work around the challenges so that they can maybe get by in high school, you know, so they can sort of hide some of these sort of characteristics that they have. But then later in life, the demands of sort of maybe living independently and then moving into the world of work and having a job or dealing with responsibilities, it can make it harder for us to stay as organised and, you know, as focused. So we can start to see some of those signs appearing in adulthood, even if, you know, especially if they've been missed when they were younger. You know, and a lot of that can be things like being forgetful, you know, or absent-minded. And don't get me wrong, we're all a bit like that. But if this is something that's quite common, you know, it could be that this is a trait of them. Tuning out during conversations, again, sometimes we want to tune out during a conversation, but if we're doing it quite often, it may be, you know, we might perceive it as being bad listeners or something. You're not listening by others, but it could just be that we're not able to keep the focus. So we then sort of tune out and we distract away. They can also blurt out and they can interrupt others quite often, and they can have trouble sitting still for long periods of time. And it's very similar to some of the things that you'll find in you know, young people as well. Struggling to finish tasks at home, you know, the same can be said for young people. You know, in school they might struggle to finish a task, their attention span can be there for so long, then afterwards they get bored and they get distracted away. Well, the same can be in adulthood for us, and especially in that sort of a work environment. So it can run in families, and you know, if a child is diagnosed, there's a good chance a sibling or a parent could have it as well if they haven't been diagnosed.
It's interesting. I was talking to a new client yesterday who wanted initially help with her son who was ADHD, recently diagnosed. And she was telling me that when she took him to get diagnosed, it was suggested that she was also, and she also turned out to have ADHD. And so did the husband turn out to have ADHD. So they're both all 35, 40 age group, I would say. And they've gone through those 30, 40 years not knowing their ADHD. And suddenly it's like, whoa, I've now got a name for these issues that I've had, which we've always just put down to those idiosyncrasies that we all have. Yeah. And they've gone, no. And during the conversation, we agreed that actually now I'll work with all of the family, not just the yes, it was very interesting because having the conversation with her, there is often that genetic connection. It's not really thoroughly understood, and it's not a guarantee that if one does one, the other one does. But certainly, where there is someone in the family, it's likely to be prevalent elsewhere in the family. And that's not entirely understood yet, that genetic connection, but there is one. And certainly, I'm sure research in one day will say it's because of this or it's because of that. So yes, that case of it running through families is like, you know, yeah, it kind of does. Yeah.
Yeah. It does tend to run through families, and you can see sometimes when, as you say, when you're working with families, you can see the same characteristics in the parents that you can in the young person, but because they have the same characteristics, they're maybe not as aware of that it's that your child is behaving differently to them. They see it as being different because they don't have that same awareness yourself. So it is, you know, you do find it usually that there is that sort of common behaviours and common issues that, you know, that they'll have together.
Yeah.
I suppose another one that just kind of on that thinking about it is people with ADHD, sorry, just need to try harder. Yeah, they just need to try harder. Yeah, come on then, just knuckle down and get on with it. Well, you know, if it was only as simple as that, you know, really, it's not a problem of motivation or laziness or even lack of discipline, because sometimes parents might say, I'm not disciplining my child enough, you know, it's all about different, we need to have, you know, better discipline in place and different things. It's not really quite as clear as that or as simple as that. So kids and adults who have it are often trying as hard as they can to pay attention. You know, they're probably trying even harder than the rest of us because we can focus and we can give it that attention. They're really giving the attention to paying attention, so they're working doubly hard. So, you know, if we tell anybody who has ADHD to just focus, it's kind of like asking someone who is nearsighted to just see further. You know, just look further. You know, it's okay, just look further, but I can't. You know, so it's the same thing. So the reason they struggle with attention, it's really got nothing to do with attitude. It's because of the differences in the way their brain functions, you know, and how it's structured. So it's not really just as simple as pay attention or focus. Their brain works differently. They don't have that ability to remain focused in the same way, and therefore they'll get easily distracted because the attention wanders. You know, as we go through it, there's lots of different things come up and different myths and facts, and we'll cover it. But there's different things that you can do to help your young person, you know, in this focus, and then it's all about the different strategies that you can introduce for them. But no, it's not simply a case of discipline, and they just need to try harder, unfortunately.
And interestingly, that focus will sometimes be there on something.
Yes.
And so there will be some things where their focus is like laser sharp. Yeah. And because it's something that interests them and their brain can function in that particular world, yes, they're on it like you wouldn't believe.
Intense, yeah.
Yeah, the rest of the stuff is like to pot. Well, how does that work? Yeah, I mean, thankfully I'm not ADHD, and so I don't know how that works. Yeah, but to live in that world must be extremely frustrating when you know that this and this you can really focus on laser sharp, and yet something else you just can't get it. It just goes over your head. Yeah, so that must be a very frustrating place to be. Yes.
I think you're right, and I think as well, because the frustrating part as well is because nobody else, you know, understands it from their perspective, is equally frustrating because the expectations that we might put on that person, because we don't understand what they're going through, will make it even worse for them. So they'll feel as if, again, you know, I'm letting people down, or I'm not able to do this. So yeah, it can maybe have a big effect on their belief systems as well then, because, you know, they're not be able to meet and manage expectations that are put on them, you know, because of how their brain is structured and how it's working.
Yeah, very much.
You know, just talking about that, because you're talking about focus there. So another thing is, well, if they have problems with focus, does that mean they can't ever focus? Now, you just said there a little bit there, Ian, if sometimes they can have like this sort of laser focus on a particular subject. So it's true that people with ADHD usually have trouble focusing, but like you said there, if they are interested in something, they may focus on it intensely, and it's kind of called hyperfocus, I think, isn't it? Hyperfocus. So you'll find that some kids in class are easily distracted, but can't pull themselves away from a game they're playing at break time, you know, but in class it's like la 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 la. But you know, when they're out playing a game of football, it's like, right, okay, you know, I've got laser focus, I'm intensely focused, and I'm, you know, I'm on it. So yes, it can be, and then, you know, in adults it can be like they can have trouble focusing on parts of the work. Like for me, it could be the admin, and they find boring, but they can pour themselves into the aspects that they really like, which for me is the creative side. So I can tend to distract away from the admin side and then put more to the creative side. But I'm aware that I'm doing that, and I know that. But you know, again, that frustration might come in where you're maybe not aware that that's happening, and it is just happening even though you're trying hard to keep that focus and remain that way. I suppose kind of an example would be that, say for instance, your son has ADHD and they're kind of seem like as if they're scattered so much of the time, you know, they focus like a laser beam, like you said there, Ian, on their favourite video game. But then that's where, you know, so they seem so scattered at other times, but when they're playing their video game, it's like this intense focus that they've got on it. And the hyper focus describes, I suppose, what can be quite a confusing aspect of ADHD. So sometimes kids who are usually easily distracted have trouble shifting their attention away from something they enjoy, like a TV show or a video game. And, you know, it can be even so much so that you can say the name repeatedly over and over and over, but they just don't hear you because their full attention is on that one thing that they're doing because they enjoy it and it has an interest for them. So then they become quite tunnel focused. It's like a tunnel vision, isn't it? They're not aware of anything going around them except what they're doing. So sustaining their attention is quite difficult for them. That's one of the main difficulties. And then I suppose choosing what to pay attention to, so it could be quite confusing for them. You know, I want to pay attention to this, but you're asking me to pay attention to that. You know, so what am I? So they're going to choose the thing that they feel more comfortable with and it's easier for them. And then obviously moving around, obviously in NLP we talk about transition a lot, but shifting their attention from one thing to another can be extremely challenging, you know, a difficult thing for them too. So, you know, like background noise can be distracting for them, you know, and, you know, if you're at home and you're trying to do homework, background noise, I suppose, could be a bit distracting for them because they don't really know what to focus on then, you know, focusing on homework or focusing on what's going on around about me. So it must be extremely frustrating. And I'm going back to what you'd said there, Ian, how frustrating it is just to, you know, to be, you know, to have that lack of ability to keep that focus and attention. Because it's not conscious, it's not consciously in their control. Although we might think it is, it's not consciously in their control. And I say it's this, like, you know, it's like telling a child, or any child that matter, to concentrate harder or to stop daydreaming, as like I touched on earlier. You know, use that analogy again. Somebody who's nearsighted to say, see further away without your glasses. Yeah, you just have to look further and you'll see. So, you know, it's not easy. You know, we can't just say stop daydreaming. Okay.
There's one that I work with who is ADHD, and his specialism is the planets. And we'll be doing a session, and I can see him starting to drift away. Yeah. And I've got no idea where he goes to, but he's just no longer paying attention to me. It's as if he's glazed over. Yeah. So I'll mention a planet name. Oh, tell me a little bit about Venus. Yeah. He's straight on it. Yeah. And he's talking to me chapter and verse about Venus, which I'll let him do for 3, 4, 5 minutes. Great. Now let's move on and do so and so. Because once you drag that attention back and you're back in the room again, you can then introduce something else. Yeah. Once he's run out of steam a little bit on his Venus exposition, then it's fine. You know.
you can pull them back in. You can draw them back in.
Yes. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because in this world of Zoom that we're in now, I'm not sure whether it's more difficult, whether it's easier working with ADHD children that tend to fidget, which can be very frustrating when you're with them in a room, but you have a bit more direct control by being bodily present. When you're on the end of a camera, it's like several miles away or many miles away, you don't have that same influence. Yeah. So again, there's a child I work with who he'll jump up and down on the bed. He'll sit throwing a water bottle up and down. He'll get a Nerf gun and start spraying bullets all around the room. And those are just his distractions. Those are the things that he needs to do to keep his brain on me. Yeah. You wouldn't do that in person. But he's in the comfort of his own bedroom and can do whatever he likes within reason. And so he does that. Yeah. And it's quite crazy to watch. And to understand that actually there's little point trying to interrupt that behavior, because if you stop him from doing something, he's going to do something else. So you might as well just let him keep throwing that bottle repeatedly up in the air. And yes, it annoys the hell out of me, but I just ignore it. If he's not doing that, he'll be shooting a Nerf gun. So, hey, whatever, you know?
It's absolutely, yeah. I think you're right. It's like working with kids when you're doing it on Zoom. It has its challenges, but you know, I think it actually works very well. Considering I had reservations to start with, I think it works really well. But you're right. There's always a lot of distractions that you can't take control of at the other side. You know, of the coin. And I had one young person today who was just getting distracted by what was going on around about him, and it was really hard. You know, and you kept kind of bringing it back in, but you just feel like, there's something going on over there, and I'm keep drawn to it. And I find myself a lot talking, like today I was doing, I had learned a lot about Pokemon. you know, just so I can bring the attention back in. This is all about Pokemon, so it's amazing, you know, what you have to do to, as you say, just to bring that attention back on you, and then you can start to re-engage them again. So it's amazing the things that you learn. It really is. So Pokemon's all about Pokemon for me at the moment.
Call of Duty and Lord knows whatever other computer game than I ever needed to know.
Yeah, it's amazing. I learn so much. It's great. It's a fact-finding mission all the time for me. It really is. Now, we've touched a little bit about on this, but another kind of question that comes across quite often is at what age do signs of ADHD appear? And I think a lot of people seem to think it comes on quite young, you know. So a question you could say, is it around 7 or 8? Is it a toddler, as a teenager, or is it any age? You know, it really is any age. So signs of ADHD can pop up at any time. But you can show signs of it from as young as preschool. So because a lot of it is to do with hyperactivity, then a lot of these symptoms can be spotted in a younger age. But many don't show up until they're later on, as school gets harder. So as we go through life and life becomes a little bit tougher for us, then that's when that some of these characteristics, these symptoms will start to show more, because we've got more to juggle. So more of it will start to show. And a lot of the time is when we're maybe hitting university, or those big those kind of big milestones that we have in life, that's when signs of it will start to come up. Or like you said earlier, Ian, you know, parents have got their own children, and then it's later on in life when they're going through that process with their own child that they then realise, actually, you know, that's something that I've had all my life, and that can explain a lot for me, and it can help them to understand and make sense of life up until that point. Definitely.
Yes, am I right in thinking that they won't test younger than 6?
I'm not sure about the testing process, but you're probably right, because a lot of it can just be to do with part of the development stage. Like a lot of these different different sort of, you know, like with autism and ADHD and dyslexia, they like to wait till a certain age because they've got past certain development milestones at that point. So they tend to wait till, I think it's about 7 or 8, isn't it, is when a lot of this sort of assessment is taking place.
It's probably worthwhile just talking about, if you are concerned about your child, how do you get an assessment? So I've been Googling like crazy on that today, and you can do dozens of online assessments. But who trusts online assessments? You know, it's likely provided by a company who is selling their services. Yeah, well, they're going to say you have ADHD, aren't they? Because they want to engage with you and treat you. So more likely you're going to go to your GP. Your GP then will refer you to a mental health provider of some description within the NHS. So it isn't necessarily mental health, could be a paediatrician, could be a variety of names or that those departments will have, but you're likely to then get an assessment through that department, and then you'll actually get a diagnosis. Interestingly, if you want to do it privately, you're looking like something like £1,000 plus. So I've got a couple of clients who have done it privately, and yeah, it's not cheap.
That is expensive, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a lot of money. But as we know, NHS is drowning at the moment because of something called a pandemic, I think. And the odds of you getting a speedy treatment is not great. Equally, CAMHS can refer you to the same NHS departments, but again, getting CAMHS to engage with you and take anything further is like dream on. Yeah, they're just drowning. So finding a diagnosis actually, therefore, is quite difficult. So I would say, firstly, follow your intuition. If it doesn't feel right, doesn't seem like it's right, well, it probably isn't. And look online, get some of the information that is out there, and then take it from there. Perhaps start with your GP or CAMHS if you wish to, because you can refer yourself to CAMHS. You don't have to go to the GP to refer to CAMHS. You can do that yourself. I'm not sure, but I would imagine getting a referral from your GP is going to carry a little bit more weight than you go and direct. But hey, do both.
Yeah, do what you have to do. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah.
I think the other thing I would add, in a lot of what we do, well, particularly in circumstances that I'm aware of, and sort of the process I've been involved in, a lot of the times in Scotland, obviously for people, I didn't say at the start, but for people who are tuning in, you can tell from my lovely tone that I'm from the more northern part of the country in Scotland. So in Scotland, we tend to, it's amazing how far I can travel, isn't it? We tend to go through the school a lot. So the schools are quite an important part of the assessment for young people in our case, so a lot of these situations, the families, the parents will contact the school, or the school will get in touch with the parents. So there'll be a bit of a collaboration there, sort of a join up, because there'll be certain things that will be picked up on either at home or in the school setting, and then from there the school can start that process going too. So it is always useful talking to the school about it as well, because they can put you in, they can guide you on where to go to and who to speak to, and possibly help with that referral as well. So it's another avenue to think about if there is something that you're not sure about. A good starting point is to speak to the school as well to see if they've got anything that they've noticed in the school setting.
Interesting. So if you're getting an assessment from the NHS, they give you a big form to fill out, and one of the people they wish to contribute to that is the school. So you have to take the form to the school and say, please, Mr. Teacher, can you fill out this form, please? Also, you need to have someone who knows that child well. So for this particular child, I filled out the form as well. So the various people you have to go to seek their confirmation that what you're saying is correct. And obviously, the more it reinforces what you say, the greater strength it then carries. And then you go and have the assessment. Yeah. And for a child, the psychiatrist who gave the assessment wanted to talk to me before they actually wrote up their report. So it's not done just on the assessment. They will look around and see what other data, what other information is to be had as well, and to get a full rounded view. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it helps to get as much information as you can. So if you are a parent who has a concern, or you're thinking there's something that you're noticing that could be, possible, link of ADHD, then it's worth speaking to, your GP or your school, the teacher, anybody that is close contact and has spent time with your child. Then they'll be able to feed into that process. It's always good to get as much information as you can. Another wee fact-finding mission. Another one is because we talk a lot about hyperactivity there and ADHD, and a lot of times it can be another myth. Myth number 6 I'm on is only boys have ADHD. Well, okay, so boys are more likely, twice as likely actually, as girls to be diagnosed with ADHD. But it doesn't mean that girls don't have it. They're just more likely to be overlooked and remain undiagnosed. And another thing with girls is they are quite good at sort of hiding things. They're very good at knowing what's expected of them and just doing what is kind of expected of them. So part of the reason ADHD can look different in boys than girls is because girls tend to have less trouble with hyperactivity and impulse control, but boys are the opposite. They tend to have more trouble with the hyperactivity and impulse control. Girls, on the other hand, might seem a bit more daydreamy. They might be like, go and live in my own little world, yeah. So you might find that more in girls, which is why it possibly can be overlooked and it's not, it can remain undiagnosed. Another thing is that boys are more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD as kids. And I think perhaps in females, it can be as they get older, perhaps when they start to hit the teenage years or into adulthood, like you were saying there earlier about the mum, putting forward, and it turned out it was both her and her partner who both had diagnosed of ADHD. So it's likely that, in a young person, girls, it may be later in life that we start to notice it, and then the signs become more apparent, and then it'll be taken away of. Whereas in boys, it's when they're younger, because a lot of it is a hyperactivity and impulse control, which is obviously quite a key part of ADHD, which I've got a little bit of thinking one of the other, one of the other myth busters that we've got. We talk a little bit about what actually is ADHD. So yes, girls can get it too, but it does seem to be a bit more prevalent in boys.
So should we just talk a little bit about what ADHD looks like? So the parents can say, you're describing my child. Yeah. So if we look at some of those things, so being easily distracted is one of those. That's quite a big one. So that builds into the focus and so on. So forgetting to do chores, disliking homework, losing things, homework, assignments, their pen, their pencil, those are each signs. Struggling to follow instructions, that's quite a big one for many children, and having trouble paying attention to details. So when you're talking to an ADHD child, you don't want to say you need to do this, 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 and this today. Ideally, you want to say no more than 3 things. So today we're going to do this, this, and this. And when you've completed the 3rd task, then you give another list of 3. Because as we know, we can all think of 3 things. Even an ADHD child is not impaired in that way. They can still think of 3 things at the same time. They'll tend to have difficulty following through with tasks. So it won't be unusual for them to start a Lego build, for example, and give up halfway through, or just lose interest halfway through, or just not be interested in completing the task. They might have joined a football club, played for 2 or 3 weeks, nah, not interested anymore. Yeah. Same with karate or a music lesson or whatever it is. They can lose interest quite quickly in something that's going on, and not following through is part and parcel of that. And they get easily frustrated with difficult tasks. So they have trouble coping with stressful situations. Again, I was talking to someone last week whose son was looking at some maths fractions. Purportedly, according to mum, he knew what the answers were, but he decided that they were too difficult and just burst into tears. Yeah. And they weren't crocodile tears, they were real tears of frustration, saying, I can't do this. Well, hang on, you did them yesterday. Yeah, but today I can't do them, and therefore I'm upset. So, yeah, coping with stressful situations can be difficult for them. Just not great. And parents and teachers might feel the child isn't listening to them, even when they're speaking to them. So, like you and I are speaking to each other now, and yes, I can see and feel that you're listening. If you were ADHD, then you might be looking elsewhere or gazing somewhere else, and so on. And yes, you are listening, but you don't look like you're listening. Yeah, which can be a little disconcerting from, and antagonistic from the parent's point of view. Yeah. So those are just some of the issues that you'll have with an ADHD child.
Yeah, absolutely, because we've been talking about paying attention and having that ability to stay focused, being organised, because a lot of what you said there about the instructions of 3 things at a time, when it comes to being organised and staying organised and following this, it's all to do with the sequence of order as well. So that is kind of slightly different from following directions, but it's the sequence of what the order goes in, and that's where it can be a bit of a problem. It can be troublesome for ADHD, and remembering things as well. So we can take something in at that time, short-term memory, absolutely fine, but then it's remembering it and then the recall at another point. Like, for instance, you said here about the maths problem. Yes, the day before they did it and it was absolutely fine. The day after, they're in a different emotional place, because self-control is another area that in ADHD it's really extremely difficult for them to deal with. And when it comes to the next day, if their thoughts and feelings are different, then they're not going to remember how well they did in the maths equation. And when you're working with young people a lot, you notice that when you ask them to go back and think about something or relate to something, it's difficult for them because they can't remember, they can't bring that information back. So that's another challenging thing for them. And thinking, the impulse control, so that self-control is huge. The big emotions that you spoke about, the stress that comes from that, the anxiety, and and for us as parents, sometimes that can seem quite simple, but actually, in fact, self-control is a really complex skill to learn. It's part of a group of skills that allow us all, not even just children, but all of us, to manage our thoughts, our actions, and our emotions together. you know, and if you break that down into the different types of control, you've got impulse control, which in ADHD is one of the key ones. You know, it's that having that control of being impulsive and doing something without, you know, stopping and thinking about it. The emotional controls, the big emotions come, they don't know how to deal with them, so therefore they react to them. And then it's the movement control, which is, like you said, it's the movement around. You know, we can't sit still, can't say pay attention, and it's the movement around. But again, that can also help them, because it lets them, if we say to them, pay attention, you know, what, you know, look at me while I'm talking to you, then, you know, their attention then is going on that and not on what you're saying. So there's lots of different things there. But, you know, the impulse control is another big one too. So they tend to say things or do things, you know, before they think about it. They just do it, and then afterwards they then go, oh yes,
Yeah,
you know. So
and it can make someone with ADHD quite vulnerable as well.
yeah.
I worked with a young lad late last year, who had problems at school. So a little clique of lads had sussed out that he would do pretty much whatever they suggested. Yeah. So they suggested that he go and lie under a car. And you can guess what happened. Yeah. Somebody got in the car, drove off. Thank the Lord, he was okay. He was lying in a position that the wheels didn't touch him. But that could have been such a dreadful, awful accident otherwise. Yeah. So, yeah, having that vulnerability of not knowing whether you should do what someone tells you to do or not tell you is part and parcel of ADHD. Yeah. So the impulse just doesn't cut in, and you just go and do it. Yeah. Not understanding the impact of your own actions because someone else told you to do it, so it's fine.
Mm-hmm. So you follow, you know, you've got the same. And I think as well, what I've been reading up on is in teenage years, that can then come into, that impulse control can then come into sort of high risk behaviours and, you know, high risk activities. So it can be quite an adrenaline seeking thing as well, which can be safe, you know, because that's fine, that's safe. A lot of times they will go out and they will be extremely thorough in making sure that what they're doing is safe and that they're following all the protocols, because, you know, they've got an intent, you know, they've got that laser focus on it. But at other times, like you've just said there, Ian, it can actually get them into trouble because they don't have that understanding to then separate, you know, what the impulse control is from the logical thinking about what am I doing here, is it safe?
Yeah.
I think, yeah, in teenage years that can become a bit more apparent because they're, you know, as we're getting older, we're more apt to then taking risks in life, aren't we, as we are when we're younger?
Yes, yeah, very much, yeah. But it's, if you're concerned about your child and you're thinking, oh my Lord, what's going on, and isn't this dreadful? Actually, you can have a normal life with ADHD. It isn't all bad, and your child can have some fantastic skills, which are, you know, potentially. So if you look at Microsoft, Google, Facebook, they are actively recruiting ADHD personnel because they have this ability to laser focus onto something. And if that something is perhaps numbers or text or coding or whatever it is, yeah, there's a great job potentially waiting for them from Google, Microsoft, and others, because, you know, their services will be in demand. And they can be taught and they can learn and they can teach themselves how to deal with the various facets of ADHD. As we've already said, some of them will fade as they get older anyway, but those others, they can learn how to deal with those with your help from people like us who can help take the edge off some of those things. And yeah, life is not all doom and gloom. There's potentially, you can lead a normal life with ADHD.
Absolutely. You know, and I think ADHD, because of, you know, people with ADHD are often, you know, outside the box thinkers. So, you know, the rest of us, you know, go through life, we have that vision, you know, we you know, we follow, this is what society expects, this is what we do. Whereas a lot of the time, because of the way that their brain works and the way it's structured, they see outside the box, so they can see the bigger picture, they can see a different picture from us. And I think it creates a lot of challenges, but a lot of opportunities for kids as well. You know, and a lot of them can turn out to be really highly successful, as you say, leading a normal life, but equally, you know, really highly successful, and they can thrive in school in certain areas because they have that laser focus, they have that ability to retain that focus on a particular thing, whereas the rest of us will eventually move on and do something. And there's a few sort of examples. That one of the kind of most famous ones is is Will.I.am. You know, I didn't realise it was when I was doing my research. I found out a little bit more about Will.I.am, and he has ADHD, and he classes that as being the thing that helped him to actually become the successful person that he is. So, you know, he's a performer, he's a producer. He was the founder of the Black Eyed Peas, and he's won, I think, is it 7 or 8 Grammy Awards or something. You know, and he's an inventor. You know, he's come up with tech gadgets. You know, he's done lots and lots of different things. And he actually puts that down to is the fact that he found keeping his attention difficult. It was hard to keep his attention, and he couldn't sit still, and he was always having to move and move around and thinking about a whole bunch of things. So he was always in that thinking mode. But actually, he found those traits actually worked well for him. It generated the creative ideas. So even although he was fidgeting, like you said, when you're talking to somebody that moves around, that actually helps them to think better. So they're being really, really creative. And you know, he said it's really, really encouraged him with his creativity, and it's allowed him, as he puts it, to keep my attention disorder in order. Yes. Which I thought was a nice quote. You know, I can keep my attention disorder in order, and he can then use it for his advantage. Yeah.
And I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's that ability to think outside the box. Because as you said, most of us are constrained by our experiences, our beliefs, and so on. And therefore, we tend to follow that line, whichever line we've chosen. And we follow that pretty much all the time. Whereas if you're ADHD, you follow this line, then that line, then this line, then that line.
Yeah.
And not constrained in the same way. So you can go places and think about things that you and I wouldn't even go there. We wouldn't touch them. Yeah.
You just never, you would never know. You'd never be able to, you would never be able to grasp the concept of doing that.
No, so it can be a very powerful thing, as you say. I think, am I right that Emma Watson is another that's had ADHD?
I think you might be right. Yes.
Yeah. Certainly, if you Google famous people with ADHD, like a whole stream of people come up. I think Oprah Winfrey was another, maybe.
There's quite a few. Michael Phelps is another one that I know of, the swimmer. He actually won the record for winning the most Olympic events in history, I think by far, you know, in general. Was it 28 medals or something he won? And he says that for him, it was all to do with, he got his ADHD diagnosis when he was younger in life. But while he couldn't sit through, so his was more about the fidgeting and the hyperactivity. So whilst he couldn't sit still in class, what he found was that when he could go to the swimming pool after school, he could spend up to 3 hours in the pool, you know, just repetitively swimming. But in class, he couldn't sit still. And that's what for him, that's what made him so successful, because he became so focused on the swimming that, you know, he was able to put that attention to it more so than probably any of us would have been able to do, and hence the reason why he's became, you know, one of the world greatest, you know, in holding the record for his swimming. So it can help us in ways, as long as we put in the support and structure that we need to help us. And I'll kind of quote Will.I.am again. I liked that wee quote he said. What was it? I'll look it up again. I've got it written somewhere.
Disorder in order.
Yeah, keeping my attention disorder in order. Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah, really good. Yes, that's something that I'll often talk to parents about, is that we don't have a problem at school, but we do have a problem at home. And it would appear that ADHD children will often have the ability to control it for a limited period of time in school, because they see that as being an unordered, structured society in which they can't do the things that they would normally do at home. So they control it while they're at school. They come out of school and then all hell breaks loose. Yeah, they're coming out like they're wired. Yeah, they're going like a crazy rocket going everywhere. And I'll say to parents, well, look, find a way of getting into a park as soon as you leave the school, or try running home from school if you're a fit mum, or that, or try and do something else that will just burn off that excess of energy that has built up that they've not been able to get rid of at school. And kind of running around the garden, running around the bedroom, doing sit-ups, high jumps, step-ups, whatever, get them doing something to just burn off that excess of energy. And I've had some fairly good results with parents that have said, yeah, that's worked, that's really helped. And just that simple thing of saying, let's stop off at the park, or let's run home, or you ride your bike and I'll walk, or whatever it is, some way of burning off that excess energy. Because they've concentrated that hard, they're managing that side of their ADHD that allows them to stay calm and focused at school. When they come out, no, too much to do it all day, so they let go when they come home.
Yeah, and what you're saying there is spot on, because I think a lot of people, it's like get home, go and play on the trampoline for half an hour in the garden, you know, burn off that energy before you then come back in. And if they come straight into the house, it's like, oh, everything's going crazy. If you do that 10-15 minutes in the garden or whatever, it's like, oh, okay, much more settled when they come back in, because as you say, it's all that energy that's been building up all day. It's just like a big release. And that's particularly so for kids, you know, for who have what we call the stereotypical of kids, is that they race around and can't stop moving. So when they have that hyperactivity, I suppose that's a particularly good way to help them to use that energy in a really positive way, and to give it a little bit of structure. But obviously not all kids with ADHD have hyperactivity as a symptom, you know, and you know, for those who do, it can actually, or usually sometimes will go away or lessen as they get older, because they learn to put these things in place themselves. They learn to understand, well, if I do this and I put my energy there, then I won't need to be, you know, using as much, kind of trying to move around, prowl around the house or run around. It doesn't, but it's not the same in all kids. And you know, I think what I found interesting was, when I was researching this, is that there's three ways a child with ADHD might actually present, and I've taken a wee note of it here. So it's either 3 types of ADHD or it's 3 subtypes of ADHD. It depends on how you want to think about it. So ADHD is predominantly hyperactive impulsive presentation. So kids who have this type of ADHD have symptoms of hyperactivity and feel the need to move constantly, which we've been talking a lot about. They also struggle with impulse control, again, we've touched on that. And typically don't have much trouble with inattention. This type is often most seen in our very young children, which is why we will see that in young toddlers, or we'll see it in the sort of younger age group, and it's a kind of first sign that we might pick up on. It's often easier to spot signs of this type of ADHD than it is the other type, and kids who have it may struggle to sit in class and manage their behaviour. So that's one of the sort of the triggers or the warning signs. The second one is predominantly inattentive presentation, as they call it. So this one really is a type of ADHD where they have difficulty paying attention. So we've got the one who are really hyperactive, but they may feel as if they're not paying attention because they're hyperactive, but they probably are actually able to pay attention. Like you were saying, you know, Ian, they're kind of looking around the room, but they're still focusing, they're still hearing you. But the ones who have difficulty paying attention, so they are easily distracted, but don't have much trouble with the impulse control or the hyperactivity. And it's sometimes unofficially referred to as attention deficit disorder. I think so. I think sometimes it can be bracketed under ADD. Kids with this type of ADHD may fly, they kind of tend to go under the radar because they're not really maybe causing a problem in class. In fact, they might come across as appear quite shy or daydreamy. So it's the kind of opposite, I think, of what people think ADHD actually is. You know, we expect the hyper, the run around, you know, not paying attention. In fact, this can be the opposite. It can be, you know, quite quiet, shy, withdrawn, and a bit daydreamy, you know, getting distracted and just kind of disappearing into your own world. So they may not have any significant behaviour problems, but their problems with attention might still get them into some difficulty. And then we have the combined presentation, so that's a bit both. So they show significant problems with both the hyperactivity, the impulse control and the inattention, and they may gradually have less trouble with hyperactivity and the impulse control as they get into their teen years. So it can, you know, that side of things can lessen as they get into teen years, as they learn to use how to manage to use their attention and their, you know, the impulse control, but the attention thing will likely stay with them, because that's the thing that they'll have to learn to manage in more detail as they go through life. But I found that really interesting because, you know, there is this misconception that it's hyperactive behaviour, it's the inability to pay attention and focus. That is what ADHD is, and it's not. And I think possibly you find, like we said, that's why maybe girls slip under the radar, because they're not presenting that immediate, that typical symptom as we think it may be. So I thought that was really, really interesting, just to show the different sides of what ADHD actually is.
Yeah.
Another one people kind of confuse it with, and I suppose it can be quite confusing because we're talking about it here, is it a learning disability? Well, it's not a learning disability. The symptoms can get in the way of learning, which we've talked about, that inability to sit in class, or getting distracted and not being able to pay attention, so having to maintain that level of focus all day in class, all day in school is not easy. So yes, it can get in the way of learning, but they don't cause difficulty in specific skills like reading, writing and maths work. But you can get it. So whilst we say it's not a learning disability, you can actually get learning difficulties as a sort of a co-occur with ADHD. So it can be a separate thing, but it can be linked in with it. So which I think that's possibly where the myth comes from, that it is a learning disability, because sometimes it can be a sort of a comorbid thing. But it doesn't mean that kids can't get help in school. So even though it's not classed as a learning disability, there's still help that parents and schools can get to help children be able to have that structure and focus, so that we can help them to be able to deal with that and having the strategies that are going to help them to be able to make that easier for them when they're in school, and to get through the day without it becoming stressful or anxious or disruptive. There's lots of support that's still out there for young people and for adults with ADHD. There's lots of support in workplaces now that you're talking about, like Google and Microsoft actually, actively recruiting for people with ADHD. So there's support out there, because they'll obviously put support and strategies in place to help support these people in the workplace. So it's all really positive, and there's lots available. We just have to make sure that we're asking for it, and we're reaching out for it.
It's interesting you're talking about whether it's a disability or not. That it often coexists with other disabilities. So it's not unusual to have dyslexia or dyscalculia or whatever else it may be alongside ADHD, which for us as lay people and for parents as lay people can make the diagnosis very difficult, which is why it's so key to go and have that professional assessment, not some Google online thing, but actually go and get that professional assessment, even though it may cost a lot of money or cost a lot of time. You need that to be able to decipher the right signals, because it may turn out that your child's got ADHD plus this, plus this, plus this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Doing something online is not going to tell you that, and it may actually confuse the ADHD diagnosis anyway, by virtue of them answering those questions in an appropriate way. So getting the professional diagnosis is essential, but be prepared that there may be things alongside that ADHD that they're also diagnosed with at the same time, or if not diagnosed, the professional may signpost you, look, you need to get this looked at, you need to get that looked at, and so on, because it's a very common thing to have something coexisting with ADHD. It's not in every single case, but in most cases there will be something else coexisting.
Yeah, and I think you're right, and it does tend to be that there is some other sort of learning difficulty that does coexist with ADHD, and I think that's where the myth comes from, that it's a learning difficulty. I think it's a similar myth that you get with an autism spectrum disorder, that it's a learning difficulty. It's not, it's a spectrum, so it goes across the board. But these myths develop because I think of the coexistence with other things that go alongside it. We've been speaking a lot about, like the things about organisation and structure and all these kind of what we call skills, or things that we do with our working memory. So I think it's kind of useful maybe to point out what we mean by these things that we've been relating to. So working memory and what's important for. So basically, working memory is it's a basic mental skill that we have, and we need it for both learning and doing everyday tasks. So it's what we call class as one of the brain's executive functions, and it's the ability to hold on to new information so we can turn it around and use it in some way. Now, obviously, we've touched on the ability to do that in ADHD is difficult because we can't always really hold on to that information and then bring it back to reuse it. So working memory allows us to hold the information without losing track of what we're doing. So we obviously know that's a bit difficult on ADHD. We need that, kids in school, we're talking a lot about in school there. So when we're in school, kids need that ability to perform well in school all day. So, even like simple things like, I think you mentioned earlier, Ian, about a maths problem. Somebody had a maths problem, the next day they couldn't do it, they couldn't understand why. So, so there's a good example, so the maths teacher asks a class, the class to do a sum. It's 21 and 13 in their head and then subtract 6 from the sum. So that's fine. Working memory enables us to work that out and to visualise the numbers the teacher has called out. It also allows us to remember what the sum of 21 and 13 is so that we can then take away the 6. That's fine. So we might not remember any of these numbers by the next class or even 10 minutes later, but our working memory has allowed us to work out that sum at that time, and then we forget about it. That's okay. So it's done its short-term job and it's allowed us to tackle what we needed to do at that time. It can act like, I suppose what I'm trying to say is it acts like a sticky note in our brain. It basically holds the information there for a short place of time so that we can work on it briefly and then perhaps connect it with other information. So this is where attention plays a big part in this role. So it then puts it into the events of sequence, and I was talking about the sequence earlier, or it might sort out different types of objects into categories. So in math class, working memory can allow kids to see the numbers the teacher is saying as symbols in their head. So it's not working memory isn't just for short-term use, but it also helps the brain organise into long-term storage. Now, we again have already recognised that in ADHD, working in sequence and with organisation are two areas that are problems. They can be troublesome for someone with ADHD. So it can make it so when we've got poor working memory, which is what happens in ADHD, it's hard for kids to then use the information that they get in school. So they might remember the numbers the teacher said to add up, but they might not recall what they're supposed to do with them. So we're talking about those 3 things you were talking about, Ian, 3 instructions at a time. So they might be said, right, there's 21 and 13 and 6. Right, that's 3 things. What do I do with them now? So that's where it starts to break down, doesn't it? So they might not recall what they're supposed to do with them, or they might not hold on to that sum of 34, so they can't subtract 6 from it. So they might go 21 and 13 is this. Okay, what was it again? So they're not able to just keep that information in the kind of longer term that we need it to. Practical instructions can also be difficult. So they may ask them simple things like, go and put your shoes on. First, hang up your coat, and then what you were saying there, Emily, do this, doing this. So the child might only be able to do one task or forget which one comes first. So they'll get the sequence. So they might remember everything that's been asked of them, but the sequence might be wrong. Some parents might say, I ask you to set the table every night, this is what you do. But the young person might never get it right. They might do it in the wrong order. They might, it's like perhaps if your young person's doing the dishes at the end of the night, they might do it in the opposite way. They might do it in the opposite way of what you expect. Clear the table, do the dishes, then wipe the surfaces down. They might then start to wipe the surfaces down first, then clear the table, and then do the dishes, or so they might just do it in a different sequence because their way of sequencing things is different to how we would expect them to do. So we have to just think about that, where the working memory. So in ADHD, the working memory is working differently to us. So it's good, I think, for as parents is to understand that and recognise that kids may find that the information that we're giving them or that they're remembering isn't making sense because of the problem with the working memory. And the brain didn't package it properly in the first place. So if your children learn information in a disjointed way, they have trouble using it later as well. So it's a big problem for them. Practical instructions can be really difficult to process because of the understanding of the sequence and then being able to retain that long-term information, that long-term memory. It can be a bit of a big problem for them.
And I think as a parent, that's exhausting. Yeah. Because you've got to keep on remembering, no, I can't ask my child to do this, I have to ask it this way. Or yes, now I need to go and check that he's got it right, because he may have got them in the wrong order, or he may have painted them blue instead of red, or he may have put the left foot on the right foot, or whatever it is. So it is just exhausting to keep yourself, keep your child safe, and to keep yourself sane. You've just got to be on it all day.
All the time.
Yeah.
I can use a prime example in our house, and I find it so frustrating. But we've got a shelf with cups and we've got a shelf with glasses, and I go in and they're mixed up, and I go, why would you put glasses with cups and cups? But you know,
Yes.
and I find that so frustrating because I've then got to go in and fix it. You know, but you know, obviously somebody in my house has that sequencing problem who then says, well, I want to put that there, I'm just going to put that there, so they don't see it. So I can understand, you know, when it's happening across a lot of things, how frustrating it can become. Yeah, extremely frustrating. But again, it's not anything that the person's doing consciously. This is all unconsciously, because their working memory, which is responsible for all of these everyday functions that we take for granted, that are natural for us, isn't for them. You know, their way of doing it is different, because their brain is structured and is using that information in a different way.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Should we talk a little bit about treatment, or have you got some more questions on your list to go?
No, I think we could probably a little bit. I just said something about how to different, you know, about teens, you know, how it might be different in teens, but we've kind of touched on that. We said sometimes, you know, signs of it in teens can be sort of risky behaviour, and, you know, how things can kind of settle a bit more. So no, I think touching on, you know, what we can do would be useful.
Sure. Okay. So I'm just going to read off of a sheet of paper now. So stimulants are the most common medications used to treat ADHD. Stimulants target dopamine, which is a brain chemical that helps control motivations, movement, and emotional responses. Since children with ADHD are often hyperactive or overstimulated, it may be confusing to think of giving a child with ADHD a stimulant. But experts explain that by giving a child a stimulant, he or she won't need to seek outside stimulation, and therefore will be able to focus and learn. Now, this is important since this enables kids with ADHD to learn age-appropriate skills and to build important pathways in the brain. So without talking through all of the names of the meds and so on and so forth, which I think isn't going to really serve any great purpose in this session, but largely the method of treatment is medication stimulant, which will impact that dopamine and some other chemicals as well in the brain. It's not just the dopamine, it's some others as well. So yes, you can have long-lasting stimulants that will last for a day at a time. You can have some that you take in the morning that will last through the day but will cut out at night. You can have some that work at night and then fade out during the day. So there's a whole range of different stimulants with different length and veracity according to what your child's diagnosis is. The key thing is to monitor how they're impacting. So if you're suddenly losing your child to sleep at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, then maybe they're not on the right stimulant, or maybe they need to take it a different time of day. Yes, having your child asleep at 4 o'clock in the afternoon is not cool. So yes, taking stimulants tends to be the most common. Obviously, you can look at therapy, so you can come and talk to myself or Kat here with regards to NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and the therapies that we can provide. Now, we can't cure ADHD. There isn't a cure for ADHD, but we can help you and your child manage some of the symptoms that they may be struggling with, or you may be struggling with. And certainly the people I've worked with have found that invaluable. Particularly where, in my case, I deal with a lot with anger and anxiety, particularly where those are big players in the scenario, then you know, the work that we can do can be quite valuable. So talking therapies, CBT, NLP and others are a good way to go, as well as the medication. Yeah. That's all I'm going to say. because
Yeah,
it's a
no, and I think that's,
minefield.
yeah, it's important to sort of point that out, isn't it? That, you know, it's not one thing, not one size fits all in terms of treatment for, you know, ADHD. And, you know, sometimes knowing what the knowing that having the diagnosis is all that's needed in order to put the support in place that you need, you know. And sometimes that's just support that you can support in school to make sure that their day in school is easier, and they've got all the steps in place that they need to help them with all of those executive function or the working memory skills, but also the strategies that we can then support with in terms of dealing with the anxiety and the stress situations that may come up, so that they then can become, you know, they can manage those big emotions that they can come, because we understand impulse control, and, you know, having self-control is one of the other areas that they need some guidance and some help with. So all of these strategies can be put in place when you understand with the ADHD, but obviously yet you've got the medical treatment side of it as well, which can work alongside the different therapies. So it's not one size fits all, but it's really important to get all avenues checked out, like Ian's saying there, just to make sure, because do you need a stimulant? You know, is that something that you have to go down? And then obviously linking that in with the support that you can do in their daily life, that they can then use that really key vital skills that they can use moving forward in life and into adulthood. And it's going to just prepare them to be able to work with those organisation skills, to plan for themselves, you know, to build on those planning skills, to have good decision making skills, so that they put trust in their own judgment. And you know, there's lots of different, having that self-control, so that emotions are not going to take over with their reactions and their decisions that they make in life, and they're going to be able to put steps in place that are going to make life easier for them to manage, you know, the way that, you know, society is looking for them to do that. Because another way, just to kind of touch on that, is another thing that sort of coexists is, you know, a lot of people will say that autism and ADHD are related. Well, they're related in several ways. ADHD is not on the autism spectrum, but like what we were saying there about dyslexia and, you know, perhaps other areas, they are related in several ways. They have some of the same symptoms, and having one of these conditions increases the chances of having the other. And you know, and there's a lot of things will overlap in terms of autism and ADHD, like trouble paying attention. You know, there's similarities there with an ASD diagnosis. So kids with autism may struggle with this for several reasons. One is the language difficulties. It's maybe not there for the ADHD person, but it can come across like the children aren't paying attention to directions because of the language, you know, the communication, because autism, a lot of it's about the communication. But it could be that they just don't understand the communication, whereas in ADHD it's more about being able to process and make sense of the information and the sequencing of the directions that's given to them. So it's the order in which it's given. ADHD can affect social skills. Again, this is the same in autism. You know, with autism, this can be a big problem, especially eye contact. And we spoke about that earlier when we talk about making someone give us eye contact, because we believe that eye contact means the person is paying attention to us. It's not, you know, it doesn't mean that they're paying attention to us. That means that they're probably not paying attention to us if we're having to force the eye contact, because they're just sitting going, I must look at you, I must look at you, I must look at you, and I'm not taking in anything that you're telling me right now. So yeah, there's a lot of crossover with autism and ADHD, and I've had a lot of parents speak to me about that. Does my child have ADHD? Does it have autism? Does that mean they have both? If they have one, does it mean they have the other? It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that there's a possibility, and there's a higher chance that they may have both, but it doesn't mean that they do. And there's a lot of similarities in the characteristics and the symptoms that you'll notice, as they overlap. What you'll find is because they tend to occur together, you'll find things like children who have language issues are more likely to have reading disorders, you know, so the reading disorders might be linked more with the communication, because it's all to do with the language skills. So you have to consider all aspects of so when they do the assessment, it'll be the whole aspect of the child's developmental functioning, which is why we were talking about Ian, about they'll possibly do that a bit later, you know, around about 7 or 8, because that allows them to have kind of charted the progress, you know, the developmental functioning up until that point. But they'll look at language, social skills, attention, behaviour, mood, you know, where they are academically, where they are socially and their skills, play skills, and their motor skills as well. So there's a huge evaluation and assessment, going back to what you were talking about earlier, Ian, from the healthcare providers when, any evaluation and diagnosis is given for a young person or even an adult, in either autism or ADHD. And we're going back to that genetic connection. They are both genetically related as well. So a person with autism has a bigger chance of having a close relative with ADHD or another developmental disorder. And because kids with autism and ADHD have similar signs, some of the ways to help with one can be helpful for the other as well. So it's useful to remember that if you do have a young person who has a diagnosis of both, you don't always necessarily have to treat them separately. Sometimes the support that you can put in place with dealing with the anxiety, the stress, the emotional responses, one is going to help the other. So it's useful to just understand that these strategies you can put in place can be put in place for both autism and ADHD if you find you have a young person who is kind of crossing over onto both of them. A prime example is I think both of them, because of the executive functioning and the using of the memory skills and the planning and the organising and the understanding of communication, is basically having a routine and visual structures, and planning and organisation to help your young person. That's one of the biggest things that you'll find is going to be a helpful tool. But just remember, there's big differences in the type of therapy recommended for each, and as Ian said there's different things you can do. There's the medical route, and there's also the therapy route, which we offer. So make sure that you're getting the right advice, and you're taking that information, you're gathering the information from all the different sources that you need to make sure that you go forward to get the right steps in place. And just to be aware that there could be a possible crossover with both autism and ADHD. So that was just, I wanted to add that little bit in, because it is a question that I'm asked quite often, Ian, in terms of that meaning, does one mean the other? And it doesn't, but it just means there's a higher chance that there could be a coexistence between both of them.
Yeah, sure. Okay, cool. I'm just thinking, looking at my notes here, I'm not sure I have anything else to add, Kat.
No, I think we've covered off a lot actually. So that's it's a lot of, as I say, huge amount of information I've picked up in my fact-finding mission to find out more about ADHD. And it's been really, really useful, I have to say. And I'm looking forward. I'm actually looking forward to our next one as well, Ian. We've got a sleep quiz coming up. Yeah. So that should be quite interesting. Fact-finding mission on sleep. So if you want to join us for that quiz, that is taking place on the 17th of March with Ian and myself again, and I expect we'll probably follow a similar format. But for anybody who has joined us tonight or who may be joining us afterwards, as with all of the webinars and the sessions that we are sharing today and over the weeks, they will be uploaded onto the the new Superheroes YouTube channel. So please, if you haven't joined us this evening, then please pop onto the YouTube channel and catch us there and listen to all the fun facts that Ian and I have shared with you tonight on ADHD. A big learning curve for us. We're not experts, but I think we know a little bit more now, don't we, Ian?
Indeed we do, yes. And if you want to watch me talk about setting ground rules, then join me on the 3rd of March. Same channel, you'll still be able to watch it on YouTube thereafter. But yeah, set up for setting ground rules. Good fun.
That's going to sound really. I think I'll be joining in on that one, Ian. I'll be listening in. Get some top tips. No. So yes, we've got a few coming up. So Ian has said there that he has managing ground rules coming up on setting ground rules and discipline. Before that, we've also got Gemma, the wonderful Gemma, is doing money management on the 1st of March. Then we have another open question and answer session on the 2nd. So if you have anything that you want to ask questions about, then please join us on that time. Then we've got Ian taking centre stage again. Then we've got Changing Your Emotions Fast with Stuart. We have an anger quiz with Gemma. Now that one would be good actually, the anger quiz. We've got Dealing with Criticism with Isabella. Another open Q&A session, that would be myself and Mary this time. How to cope with illness, and I'll just kind of We've got a homeschooling one, and a self-harm quiz and a few other ones. So yeah, there's lots still to come up over the next month. So please keep tuned in, and we'll be uploading them all onto the Superheroes YouTube channel. So I think all we can say now, Ian, is if you've anything else you want to add, is thank you for joining us and for listening to us and for taking the time out. And we hope you've learned something new today and something useful.
Good luck.
Have fun, everyone. Okay, good night.